Hello again. Welcome to week 6, where we are talking about scene to scene editing. So, the editor's job is tricky because, on the one hand, you're responsible for the most tiny, minute, frame by frame detail, a flash frame here, a fade there, the sound, everything needs to be in sync. You're responsible for micro level stuff. You're also responsible for the scene and performance, but you're also responsible for this macro level, big picture. Do the scenes fit together? Is the narrative arc of the full, 2 hour long or 30-minute entire piece working? So it's tough on the editor to dive in and do microscopic stuff, but then also be able to pull out wide and see that the microscopic work is accumulating to a successful big picture film. But that's the name of the game in editing, and that's what we're talking about this week. How do your scenes relate to one another, and what is exactly is happening where they're running into each other in your timeline? The way we think about shots and beats within our scene, right? Oh, this shot is the beat where this thing is happening that I need to have happen. We are now going to start being able to step back and look at our scenes and what beats are happening in the scene. Well, I need this scene here because it needs to set up this, because in this later scene, we need to know that in order for this to make sense. Now, in this class, and probably up to this point in your editing life, you aren't working on things with, a ton of scenes, maybe 3, 4 scenes. As you progress, you know, when you work on a 30-minute documentary or a feature-length narrative film, you're dealing with all of these scenes, and it can get really hard to keep track of what's what and where's where and who's who. And there are lots of different strategies on how to do that. I'm just going to share with you the strategies that have worked for me when I've worked on projects with lots and lots of scenes. And for me, what that's been is note cards, different colored note cards, one designated for every scene in my timeline. And it's not like this is happening right off the bat. Sometimes this is happening, in the middle of the rough cut, or when I hit a problem point, I'll be like, you know what? I need to get out the note cards because I'm having trouble figuring out the purpose of all these different scenes. You get out the note cards, and scenes with these actors all have this color, scenes where that's happening all have that color, and then you stick them up on a bulletin board, and it allows you to see patterns, and it allows you to understand how things are interrelated to one another. Because just like, the Kuleshov effect explains how shots change their meaning to the audience depending on what's in front of them and behind them, scenes, the same thing happens, right? If I have scene A here where it is revealed that I am a vampire, and then I have scene B here where I take the person on a date, and then I have scene 3 here where the vampire kills the person, all 3 of these scenes are important beats. And if I remove any one of those or rearrange them, it would totally change the understanding for the audience. Okay, so just how as editors within the scene we're so critical about shot by shot what's leading to what, we need to think about that way for the scene, and these note cards can really help. One example of how the note cards really helped me was I was editing Dr. Scherf's documentary film about Moby Dick. Maybe you've seen it. Anyway, he is actually a little bit in the film as sort of our guide throughout the film. And I remember with the note cards, any scene with Professor Scherf was a blue card. And then other scenes, scenes of interviews with experts were green. Scenes where we went on a tour of Moby Dick stuff was yellow. Other scenes were white. And so you end up with this whole pattern of color up on the board. And what we noticed was all the blue note cards were in the beginning and in the end. And in the middle, there was no blue, which meant our guide was talking to us in the beginning and talking to us at the end, but totally disappeared through the middle of the film. And so we had to do something about that. We had to rearrange some scenes, put something in the middle so that we don't totally have our guide disappear from us. And it was doing this, looking at the structure with the note cards, that allowed us to see that pattern and improve the film in that way. Note cards are great that way. You can move them around, you can tear them up, you can add new ones, and they can help you get a big picture of the structure of what's going on. Now, speaking of structure, an editor is responsible for the structure of the film and the storytelling, the narrative structure. As a result, you as an editor need to be pretty good with 3-act structure, the hero's journey, telling a good story, setup, conflict, resolution, because you're ultimately the one who's got to time those things out correctly so that the story works. Now, I know you're all familiar, you've had so many different classes learning about 3-act structure and storytelling. I'm going to summarize it here and just make sure we all understand a few key beats that I'm going to want to see when you write up your script analysis for your films. So the first beat that we need to have in every good story is the setup. Sometimes this is super quick, but we need the setup, establishing where are we, who's this person, so that we can care about that person. Okay? So where's the setup? Next, we need to introduce the catalyst or conflict. Now, that could be, the conflict could be something as big as, like, our protagonist was in a car accident. It could be something as subtle as our protagonist is sitting in the car and looks across on the sidewalk and sees someone they recognize. Super subtle. Whatever the case may be, that event occurs, and then guess what? We see our protagonist emotionally change in some way, and now we're off and running. Okay, so that's the second beat. Introduce the catalyst, where we visibly see the change, which leads to Act 2, right? Which is the development of dramatic action. So rising action. This is the bulk of what's going on. This is obstacle, overcome it, obstacle, overcome it, struggle, 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 build, build, build. And as the protagonist is doing all of this, we're getting to know them, we're getting to like them, we're getting connected with them. So this is the developing action. And generally this develops and increases in intensity and emotion and importance, and builds to some kind of climax. Okay? And that's the end of that building action, leads to the climax, which then we have our resolution. What happened? How does it resolve? What's the answer? Did he do it? Didn't he do it? Does he meet the person? Is he a vampire? Whatever. Resolution. And then we have one more little beat. Sometimes it's one shot that is a closure beat. What is life like now? Are things back to normal? Have things been changed forever? How have they changed? Sometimes this is a shot, a brief scene, the closure moment. So setup, introduction of catalyst, developing dramatic action, resolution, closure. And I'm going to, in the Moodle assignment about your script analysis, I'm going to reference those beats. And we as editors need to know where they're happening, which scene. If I've got a scene in my film where none of these beats are happening, probably I need to cut that scene, right? If I've got a scene in my film where it's introducing the catalyst, but it's happening, 5 minutes into a 10-minute film, I probably have a problem here. So structure is important, and it's something, now that we're moving out of the single scene film, that becomes our responsibility and we need to be on top of. Okay, so in addition to structure and how scenes interrelate with one another, we also need to talk about, in our timeline, how are these scenes transitioning from one to the other? Is it just this scene, picture and sound, cut, and into the next scene? Fade to black, fade up. What are we doing? It matters. It's important. And it can be surprisingly tricky. I remember in graduate school, the first time I was, hired as an assistant editor on a feature film, an indie feature. I was assistant editor. I'd never worked on anything that big. I'd also never really worked on anything somebody else had shot and that had really traditional, like lots of coverage options. And so I really struggled. I'd cut the scene, my scenes would be great, and then I never quite knew how to get out of the scene and into the next scene. And it took me a while to recognize, like, whoa, this is a new area I'm not familiar with, and start developing some techniques and strategies for understanding how to do it. Because the fact is, and right, Murch talks about this, as the editor, we're serving the audience. And we're doing all the time, we're trying to put on our hat and be like the surrogate for the audience and understand what they're looking at and how they're feeling and what they're understanding. And transitions between scenes, audiences oftentimes need some time to digest what just happened before they get into the next thing that's going to happen. They need to transition. Now, sometimes we don't want them to, and we're going to just do a hard cut from, I know where the treasure is, hard cut, me digging in the sand or whatever, because we don't need that time. But often there's a beat, there's some transition that needs to go on there that isn't always apparent, and we're going to practice that. In my experience, the solution to this problem usually comes to you through sound more often than picture. Sometimes picture will be the thing that leads you to the solution, but oftentimes it's our ears need to resolve this scene before they can get into the next scene. So whether that means we need, the door to close, or we need the picture to fade out or cut to black and still hear the car drive away, and then we need to hear the dog barking in the next scene, neighborhood, before we fade up on that scene. Sometimes we need this music to transition between the two, but it's oftentimes your ears that are going to guide you on how to make these transitions. How much time do we pause in black between? How much time do we hang on that establishing shot at the beginning of the next scene before going into the meat of the scene? These are the issues that we need to start wrestling with. Okay, so let's take a look at the way, this a couple of different editors handle going from one scene to the next. And this is by no means exhaustive. There's an infinite, number of different ways you can go from scene to scene. I just wanted to throw out a couple of different examples to get us thinking about it. And then I trust you guys, once you get into this, you're going to come up with your own unique and creative and cool approaches to transitioning between scenes. So the first one I have here is from Saving Private Ryan. I forgot Bryan Cranston was even in that. Everybody's in that movie. And it is obviously Spielberg, and Spielberg is always working with Michael Kahn, and that is who had edited this film, and he's edited, and he's still editing everything Spielberg does. He's fantastic. So let's see. This is when the army is realizing that all the Ryan boys have been killed in the war except the Matt Damon Ryan boy, and they are talking about that and transitioning to what they're going to do.
Daniel, Ryan.
The three men are brothers, sir. I've just learned that this afternoon their mother's going to be getting all 3 telegrams. That's not all. There's a 4th brother, the youngest. He parachuted in with the 101st Airborne night before the invasion. He's somewhere in Normandy. We don't know where.
Is he alive?
We don't know.
Come with me.
All right. Great film, great transition between scenes. One of the big things working here, right, is the score. And the score is consistent from scene to scene. So we're hearing that orchestral John Williams score all the way through both, which is helping smooth out that transition. Another thing Michael Kahn is doing here is watch, and this is a typical editing approach. You're always looking for things that wipe across the frame or move across the frame or enter the frame. So watch the Cranston character. He'll step up, he'll move to the left and sort of give us a natural wipe, which leads to the cut. Check it out.
Come with me.
Whoop. Right? That is a great thing you're looking for. Editing is, as Murch talks about, it's directing eyeballs and misdirecting eyeballs. So wipes and things like that are so great because any motion our eyes follows, right? So our eye is following his motion across and not thinking about that there's an edit immediately following it. Now we have that wipe, the music's going, we linger a beat to set up this location. And then again, motion coming into frame. Now, how long do you hang here? Michael Kahn felt, hey, we needed some time to digest this. We're jumping across the country. We're jumping, from this sort of urban office-y looking location to a total rural thing.
Come with me.
And notice again the sound, right? Come with me. Very quiet. We hear the music, and then we hear the car come passing through. So that's one example of a transition. Let's take a look here. This is Do the Right Thing, Spike Lee, and Spike Lee is always working with Barry Alexander Brown. I think he's edited every Spike Lee movie from the beginning. So let's take a look at this transition.
Extra cheese is $2.
Pizza delivery! All right, later.
Now that's just a straight cut, right? Pizza's extra cheese is $2. Hard cut. But notice the sound, right? This dialogue is delivered, we cut, and then we get the doorbell, almost in like a response.
The cheese is $2.
Pizza delivery!
That cut without the doorbell is a different thing.
It's $2.
So it's oftentimes that sound that's the key to making. So it's oftentimes how you're using sound. Maybe there's a key sound just before the edit or a key sound just after the edit that distracts the ears and helps us make this transition. Because filmmaking is crazy. We're asking audiences and their eyeballs and their brains to jump time, to move locations, to just totally, reintroduce them into some totally new place. It can be traumatic for an audience, and little tricks like this can keep them engaged, keep them comfortable, keep it smooth, and not even to mention, I'm sort of talking in practical terms, there is emotional and symbolic and, wonderful things you can also be doing as an editor here, where you're not just, making their journey pleasant, but you're also potentially, right, introducing symbolic meaning in different things or repeating sounds or images, so that the possibilities are endless. Okay, let's look at a scene transition from Chinatown by Roman Polanski. This was edited by Sam Osteen, one of the all-time greats who we'll actually hear about more later. So let's take a look at this.
There's a waterlogged drunk in the morgue. Involuntary manslaughter if anybody wants to take the trouble, which they don't. It seems like half the city is trying to cover it all up, which is fine by me. But Mrs. Mulray, I goddamn near lost my nose, and I like it. I like breathing through it. And I still think that you're hiding something. JJ, get us to see Mr.
All right. Nice transition. We need to stick around to hear her say, you know, although he doesn't hear it, call out to him. And then we hold an extra beat as her car heads out. But I want you to notice again, something like the doorbell in Do the Right Thing. We lead in with the sound of this door as part of this transition. In fact, if you go frame by frame, it's an overlap edit. You hear the door before you see it. Okay? This is how you improve as an editor. You go and you look at the best that do it and look at their tricks. And what you'll find is, in editing, for the most part, it's straight cut or overlap edit. There aren't that many tricks. There aren't that many things to do. It's how you do it and how effortlessly you can make it look where the audience doesn't have any clue of all the manipulation and little subtle things you're doing, but the overall experience really benefits from it. Okay, here's another Sam Osteen from Chinatown.
Maybe we can put the whole thing off on a few big shots and you can stay the head of the department for the next 20 years.
Now again, some more dialogue and door closing. What's interesting about this one is we linger, right? The dialogue is done. This is just a reaction shot, but it's important that we are paying attention to this character and his contemplation of what was just said. We hear Jake exit, hold a beat, and then actually a very similar trick to used before, right? Lead with that door opening sound. Now, I found this lingering beat interesting, and it works very well in the film. There's fun, interesting things you can play with in sort of hanging on a scene longer than the audience anticipates. And there's a great filmmaker who actually started as an editor named Hal Ashby. And Hal Ashby started as an editor, but then moved on to be a director. And he often plays with hanging on a character longer than we would expect. And here's an example from one of his classic movies, Harold and Maude, where that is happening. Let's take a look. It's really interesting. Right? Now, that scene could have ended any number of places. We could have ended that scene here, could have ended the scene when he slams his finger in the door. You could have ended the scene when this clicks. You could have even ended the scene after it clicks when he realizes his gun is empty, but we still hang on it to this moment of sort of personal reflection. Really unique. This is a Hal Ashby signature. He does this type of thing in many films. And the result is, in Hal Ashby films, you care a lot about subplot, like just unimportant characters. In a normal film, this police officer would just be a sort of one-dimensional police officer. In this film, he becomes this really complex, confusing, interesting character. And that comes from when this transition is happening to get out of the scene. Okay, here's an example from a documentary film. This is Searching for Sugar Man, a great film if you've never seen it. And this is a key pivotal moment when this guy is describing, he's been searching for this long lost musician when he finally makes connection with him. Take a look.
Shock. I'd been sleeping and I ran into the other room, into my study, and I picked up the phone and she put hers down and I said, hello, and a voice said,
hello, is that Sugar?
and I knew. I just knew because I knew that voice. I'd heard that voice so many times on the records, I knew it was him. I was talking to Rodriguez. That for me was one of the greatest moments of my life.
All right, a little bit long, but that's a big moment in the film. I can't resist. It's hard for me to cut out of it. So great stuff there, you know, and even before the transition, it's really nice, right? When they cut in the audio off the phone of Rodriguez speaking instead of hearing his voice. That's really cool. But what do we have going on here? Because we're making a huge jump. If you haven't seen the film, this man is from South Africa and he's in his South African record shop and he's talking on the phone to Rodriguez, who's in Detroit and who's been a total mystery, and he's been looking for the whole film, and now we are locating him. So how do we handle this?
Talking to Rodriguez. That for me was one of the greatest moments of my life.
So we cut picture early, so it's an overlap. This is Detroit skyline, but we were still hearing the voice of the outgoing interview and the sort of droning mysterious score from the outgoing interview. That transitions us into the Detroit River, tilt up, bring in some Rodriguez music, which is what we've been doing throughout the film. More establishing shots of Detroit. Detroit neighborhood establishing shot of this house. Music still going. And then in we go to the reveal through the window, right? So really lovely transition. And again, the technical stuff that's going on isn't complicated. It's the execution. And that comes down to editors understanding their story, understanding pacing, understanding what the audience needs at what moment. And that's our responsibility. Okay, here's and I'm just going to get into this a little bit because this is getting a little bit into montage, which we'll talk about next week. But here's a great transition from The Graduate, a very famous transition coming out of the big montage and into the next scene. And again, this is The Graduate. Once again, Sam Osteen, who we talked about earlier, who edited Chinatown. Let's take a look.
A love once knew has now grown old.
Ben, what are you doing?
Well, I would say that I'm just drifting here in the pool.
Why?
Well, it's very comfortable just to drift here.
One of the great all-time edits, and we will talk more about this whole montage next week. But again, so simple. It's just an L cut. We're in this scene, but we're hearing the audio from this scene. fantastic moment in the film, jarring experience for the viewer, perfect at that point in the film. And then let's look at one more, sort of more alternative approach to doing a scene transition. This is from a film called Out of the Blue by Dennis Hopper. The editor is Doris Dyke. And basically there's a young teenage girl who is her mom. She's got a rough life. Her dad's in prison. Her mom is a drug addict, and she's about to look through the window and see that her mom and new boyfriend are using again, which is going to motivate her to run away. So let's take a look at how he handles it.
Let's go!
All right. So, verging on montage, maybe it's, we should talk about this more in terms of montage than scene transition, but that's what it is. It's very unorthodox scene transition, which Dennis Hopper, famously did in Easy Rider, and he's doing again here. But really effective in getting us to the next scene, but keeping us connected to her motivations of why she's doing this, what's on her mind, and all these jumps back and forth aren't particularly jarring, in part because of the smooth editing happening here, where we're waiting for her to turn, we're matching that from shot to shot, we're letting her clear frame right here, whoop, cut, into motion coming onto screen, and then they cut back again, and then there's this really cool match cut happening once she's standing in the road, right? She stands here and turn, and we match cut with her looking one last time and back. It's just exciting, right, to see how flexible film is. You as an editor have endless possibilities, and just going from scene to scene opens up this Pandora's box of cool things you can try, and I'm excited to see the strategies you employ on the upcoming projects. Okay, so that's it for this week. See you next time.